welcome everybody to the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, and we will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is entitled Holding the Biden Administration Accountable for Wasteful Spending and Regulatory Overreach. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion into the record. The chair now recognizes himself for a brief point of personal privilege. Today's hearing marks the first hearing of our subcommittee in the 118th Congress and my first as its chairman. Now, that doesn't mean we have been inactive, doesn't mean that we haven't been doing anything. In fact, we've had a number of discussions, letters that have gone out, and conversations with, for example, today, the inspectors led to this hearing. So many more to come, and I'd like to extend a welcome to all of our subcommittee members, both the Republicans and the Democrats, and look forward to serving with you over the next 2 years. Like some of you, this is my first term as a member of the Oversight Subcommittee specifically, and while I'm no stranger to oversight issues, I look forward to learning how we can make our government more accountable to the American people and the consumers that we serve. I want to be clear, this subcommittee will approach oversight in a fair and even-handed manner. That being said, I will not hesitate to use my authority as chairman to hold regulators accountable, and I certainly am not going to shy away from topics that might be sensitive or frankly uncomfortable to either side of the aisle. I think that is part of our duty. I look forward to working with the ranking member, Mr. Green of Texas, and look to accomplish our shared objectives. So I'd like to now recognize the ranking member for a brief point of personal privilege.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I concur with you that many things have been done prior to today, and I'd like to accentuate the meeting that you and I had. It was very beneficial. We have made many agreements. Probably one that you and I both understand is that there will be times when we won't agree, but we've also agreed that we won't be exceedingly disagreeable. And we've agreed that we'll meet again. You have a great mentor on this committee to assist you. Ms. Wagner was chair, and she and I worked closely together. I will look forward to doing a similar thing with you, and I'd like to welcome all of the members to the committee as well. Thank the witnesses for being here. And Mr. Chairman, without question, reservation, or hesitation, I'm convinced that there will be something that you and I will be able to work on together. And I look forward to doing that thing as well as many others. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and I appreciate that. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Today's hearing is entitled Holding the Biden Administration Accountable for Wasteful Spending and Regulatory Overreach. Oversight of the executive branch is a vital check on the president's power, regardless of who occupies the Oval Office. In fact, I had a mentor in my first couple of terms from Michigan, the Lion of the House of Representatives, John Dingell, who taught me a number of things. One was the tyranny of the vote, which is what we just experienced earlier. Doesn't matter what plans you have, doesn't matter who you're with or where you're at, when they ring the bells, we have 15 minutes to go and do our constitutional obligation on the House floor. So that's, we're delayed a couple of minutes because of that. But the other is oversight. And in fact, I decided I was just gonna look up a simple definition of oversight. And this was what popped up on Wikipedia, of all things. Congressional oversight is oversight by the United States Congress over the executive branch, including the numerous U.S. federal agencies. Congressional oversight includes the review, monitoring, and supervision of federal agencies, programs, and activities, and policy implementation. If it's good enough for Wikipedia, it should be good enough for us in this committee to know what our lane is here, and that is to make sure that we are holding those in the administration accountable. The inspectors general before us today represent 4 agencies who touch nearly every part of our financial system. The work done by your offices is paramount to make sure that these agencies stay within the bounds Congress established for them. In recent years, these regulators have pushed those limits, leaving Congress with little or no recourse. In fact, I would argue that there's no better example than the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, also known as the CFPB. Over a decade ago, as a response to the great financial crisis, Congress created the CFPB as an agency charged with protecting consumers. Since its inspection, the Bureau has grown to radically transform the notion of consumer protection, often at the expense of small business owners and hardworking Americans with little to no benefit for the actual consumers. Now, I say actual because oftentimes these so-called advocates are really ginning up a paycheck rather than looking for protection. And now, Director Chopra's strategy of regulation by enforcement has left many wondering how one agency can have so much autonomy with virtually no oversight from Congress. Well, we know that the courts are weighing into that at this point. Mr. Bielek, you've led a staff that has the difficult job providing independent oversight and investigations into two governmental agencies, both with very different missions, but equally consequential to today's financial system. In 2022, the Fed's Office of Inspector General conducted 13 audits of the Reserve Bank compared to just 5 at the CFPB, a less than a 30% allocation. While I am aware that new programs created under the CARES Act have increased your workload, this begs the question, why did Congress fail to give the Bureau their own Inspector General? I was not here for the creation of Dodd-Frank, but I came immediately afterwards, and I've been living with the echo effects of it. Mr. Delmar, like the Fed, the Treasury's IG's office has tasked with overseeing massive programs that have billions of dollars in federal spending. Whether they be programs that were a result of the pandemic or the partisan American Rescue Plan, the Treasury Department will face challenges in holding participants of these programs accountable for proper use of those funds. Lastly, I want to spend some time focusing on the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC oversees $118 trillion in annual trading volume, 29,000 registered entities, 24 exchanges, 95 alternative trading systems, and depending on the day of the week, digital assets. Last year, the SEC proposed an unprecedented 34 rules, 34, with an additional 20 or so left on their most recent agenda. Mr. Sherrick, Ms. Sherrick, the IG report your office released last fall was frankly jaw-dropping. While the chair continues to push a rushed rulemaking agenda in his effort to rewrite nearly every aspect of securities law, the agency has failed to keep its own house in order. Furthermore, these efforts have been met with little question or inquiry from committee Democrats. Ranking Member Waters continues to defend Chair Gensler at every turn. Which makes the above statement so alarming is the lack of stability that the SEC's Inspector General's office has had. Since the last appointed IG retired in May of last year, 3 different individuals have assumed the acting Inspector General position over the last 10 months. Ms. Sherrick, while I have no doubt you'll be able to answer our members' questions, it is worth noting that the current acting IG has only been on the job for roughly 90 days, and will be need to replaced again in this April. Given the volume of rules currently before the SEC, one would hope that it is the chair's preference to resolve this vacancy issue in a timely manner, but then again, maybe not. Regardless, that's unacceptable in my mind. So without objection, I enter into the record the letter we sent to Chair Gensler last week calling on him to appoint a permanent Inspector General at the SEC to allow for consistent and proper oversight of the agency. And I look forward to hearing from all of the witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, friends, the subcommittee will hold a hearing titled Holding the Biden Administration Accountable for Wasteful Spending and Regulatory Overreach. No mention of President Trump. Dear friends, we live in a world where it's not enough for things to be right. They must also look right. And much of today's hearing will emanate from what happened during the pandemic. You see, it doesn't look right when the world knows that the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic on March 11, 2020, during the watch of a Republican president, Donald Trump, and today, this powerful committee will focus only on the watch of the Democratic President, Joe Biden. Sadly, this looks like a partisan witch hunt focused on a Democratic president wherein the perfect will become the enemy of the good by overlooking the good that was done. all the while ignoring the performance of his predecessor, Republican President Donald Trump. Therefore, a better title for this hearing would be How Republicans, My Friends, Are Out to Get a Democratic President by Making the Perfect the Enemy of the Good. The danger with making the public the enemy of the good is the adverse impact it is likely to have and produce during a future pandemic when millions of lives may be at risk and immediate action is necessary. Understanding this, I will focus on the good done by putting the American people above Republican politics during a pandemic. This was done by providing direct support to the American people with $814 billion to households and individuals, by supporting small businesses with $792.6 billion through the Paycheck Protection Program, by helping states keep schools, businesses, and emergency services open with nearly $150 billion, which included dollars to almost 90,000 local businesses, by fighting the pandemic with $47.8 billion for COVID-19 testing, contact tracing, and mitigation, and with $16 billion to fund vaccine distribution as well as supply chains, by keeping people in homes with $29.6 billion in emergency rental assistance to 6.5 million households, by keeping children out of poverty with $109 billion through the child tax credit. All of this was done because Democrats put the American people above Republican politics. Therefore, my refrain will be, while Republicans are making the perfect the enemy of the good, generally speaking, I will focus on the good accomplished when Democrats put the American people above Republican politics. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, and we are having a little clock issue up behind you. And there is one clock that is operating in front of me, but we're going to try and take a moment here to get that clock fixed so that the members themselves, when they are having their question time, have an accurate reading of how much time they have. So if you'll bear with us for just a moment. You're going to give it a test run? Oh, there we go. It's countdown. All right, let's reset that to 5. And we'll turn to the testimony of our witnesses today. So today we welcome the testimony of Mark Bielek. Mr. Bielek is the Inspector General of the Office of the Inspector General for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I will note that earlier today, seated right down there, was Chair Powell, who I believe it was Mr. Rose who had asked about some of that interplay in between the Fed and the Board of Governors and the CFPB. Mr. Bielek, for over 40 years, has been an Inspector General in that community at least, and has that experience. He previously served in numerous capacities at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of State, and the Department of Commerce, all in the Office of Inspector Generals. As the Board and CFPB IG, he serves as a member of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. Richard Delmar is the Acting Inspector General of the Department of Treasury, Office of Inspector General. He has served as Deputy Inspector General and Counsel and as a Media and Legislative Liaison and Whistleblower Program Coordinator at the Treasury OIG. Prior to the Treasury OIG, Mr. Delmar served on active duty in the Navy JAG Corps and as a trial attorney in the Department of Justice Tax Division. Sir, we thank you for your service to our country. Mr. Delmar is also a member of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee and chairs the Council of Inspectors General on Financial Oversight. Rebecca Sherrick. Ms. Sherrick has served as the Deputy Inspector General for Audits and Evaluations of the SEC since January of 2014. Last year, she served as the Acting Inspector General, excuse me, following Mr. Carl Hawker's retirement. Ms. Sherrick is active in the federal oversight community and chaired a subgroup of the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, Enterprise Risk Management Working Group. So we thank each one of you for taking time to be here today. Each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony, and without objection, each of your written statements will be made part of our permanent record. So, Mr. Bielek, if you would please go ahead. You are recognized for 5 minutes for your oral remarks.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Green, and members of this subcommittee. I'm Mark Bielek, the Inspector General of the Federal Reserve Board and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss our oversight of the board and the CFPB. Independent, objective oversight is just critical for ensuring government agencies work efficiently, effectively, abide by the law, the regulations, the rules, and practices that govern them. Such oversight work is, of course, also vital for maintaining public trust and confidence in government institutions. Toward that end, over the last 5 years, we have issued 108 audit and evaluation reports. 61 of those reports focused on the board and included 175 recommendations for improvement. 47 of those reports focused on the CFPB and included 122 recommendations. To provide the most effective oversight, we consider a number of factors when we plan our discretionary work. We look at levels of risk within a program or operation and areas that we see as major management challenges. As risk areas shift over time, we appropriately adapt our work to address those changing conditions. The result is that the balance between our board and CFPB workload will fluctuate from time to time. Our board and CFPB audits and evaluations cover a broad area. In 2021, we identified several major management challenges facing the board, including pandemic response, emergency lending facilities, design and implementation, organizational governance and enterprise risk management, and information security and cybersecurity oversight at supervised financial institutions. We also identified major management challenges facing the CFPB, including information security, supervision and enforcement strategy, and managing consumer complaints. We're currently updating our management challenges for 2023. In addition, we have other ongoing work covering the board's and Reserve Bank's ethics programs pertaining to personal investment and trading activities, the CFPB's process for conducting enforcement investigations, and the CFPB's effectiveness and timeliness in responding to consumer complaints. Details on these projects are contained in our publicly available work plan, which we update quarterly. We also conduct investigations into possible violations of law, regulation, or policy. Matters that we often investigate include bank fraud, employee misconduct, ethics violations or conflicts of interest by agency officials, leaks of protected information, and waste or mismanagement of funds or government resources. Since the start of the pandemic, we have dedicated significant resources to investigating potential fraud related to the board's emergency lending facilities. Over the last 5 years, we have closed 170 investigations, leading to 116 convictions and $4.4 billion in financial actions. We opened a total of 141 pandemic response-related cases, 37 of which are now closed, resulting in 62 convictions. So in conclusion, I am so very proud of the breadth of our oversight work, especially given the challenges posed by the pandemic. Congress is a key stakeholder for us, so we, of course, always welcome your feedback on risk areas that you see facing the board and the CFPB. This concludes my statement, and I'd be pleased to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bielek. We appreciate that. And Mr. Delmar, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your oral remarks. If you could make sure that the button is hit and then that microphone's a little closer to you, if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Green, and members of the subcommittee. Rich Delmar, the acting IG for the Department of the Treasury, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the oversight work that we've done on the many programs that Treasury is responsible for. I'll also discuss at the end, if I have time, I understand the committee has an interest in some of the work we're doing with respect to FinCEN. Treasury has responsibilities under all three of the major pandemic statutes that have passed since 2020. And its responsibilities have expanded because of that. They've been responsible for dispersing over $650 billion to a large universe of recipients, governmental organizations, businesses, and many others. We have oversight responsibility for 12 of those programs, and I'm going to talk about 4 of them today where we have found concerns about improper payments, instances of fraud and questioned costs, and internal control concerns. The programs are the Air Carrier Payroll Support Programs, the original Coronavirus Relief Fund, the Emergency Rental Assistance Programs, and the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. To put all of these in context, I want to mention a couple of concepts that are key to the work we do. And that is the whole concept of improper payments and fraud, the concept of questioned costs, and the role of a Treasury Bureau, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, and its Do Not Pay program. Improper payments are, as it suggests, payments that aren't authorized. They were incorrectly done. It's not the same thing as fraud. Any instance of fraud will be, by definition, an improper payment, but not every improper payment will constitute fraud. It could be something that happened by mistake, by accident, by misinterpretation of eligibility, but in both cases, money that should have gone to authorized recipients doesn't get there or goes to unauthorized recipients. And to the extent that happens, the effectiveness of the program and the execution of Congress's intent in creating that program is not met. So that's a key concern. We have done audit work on Treasury's improper payment program, and we have determined that, at least with respect to the bureaus other than the IRS, the department is in compliance with those rules. BFS's Do Not Pay program, it reduces the amount of improper payment because it's a forum by which people can find out if a recipient is entitled. It can be made more effective if it has greater access to all the relevant information. We've done some work on that. One of the big concerns is the access it has to the Social Security Administration's master death file. And there have been some efforts to improve that. There was actually legislation that will go into effect later this year that will increase the availability of that Social Security information to the Do Not Pay program. Moving on to the specific programs for which we have oversight, the Air Carrier Payroll Support Program, there's actually 3 of them, one under each of the statutes, gives payments to air carriers, passenger and cargo, and affiliated businesses that were impacted by the decline in air traffic. We have a mandatory audit requirement for a subset of those eligible carriers and contractors. Generally, it's the smaller ones. What we found was that there was a systemic problem in the way that the amounts that they were paid because of misinterpretation of the rules. And we've addressed those concerns. One of the big problems is self-certification versus actually going out and checking. Under the coronavirus relief program, the work we did, we set up a portal by which all the recipients could report what they had done with the money, and I see I'm running out of time, so let me skip. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program, there are actually a couple of those. We are getting a lot of complaints about how that works, and we've actually set up a specialized team to process those complaints and get caught up with the problems that are being reported to us about that. And we will look at those as appropriate. Lastly, I just wanted to mention the FinCEN work that we're doing. We have a series of related audits dealing with how FinCEN manages its bulk data provision program. And we see issues with the MOUs, we see issues with the controls on how that information is used, and we have a series of reports that are going to be coming out starting in the spring and throughout the year.
We look forward to that. Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Sherrick, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your oral testimony.
Chairman Huizinga, Ranking Member Waters, Ranking Member Green, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the efforts of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission Office of Inspector General to report on the management and performance challenges at the SEC and some of the OIG's recently completed audits and evaluations. In my testimony, I am representing the OIG, and the views I express are those of my office and myself, do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or any commissioners. The core mission of the SEC is to protect investors, maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. The OIG is an independent office within the SEC that conducts audits, evaluations, and investigations of the SEC's programs and operations to detect and deter fraud, waste, and abuse, and to promote integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness. In doing so, the OIG plays a critical role in helping the SEC achieve its mission. The OIG Office of Audits, which I manage, provides essential accountability and transparency, and where appropriate, makes recommendations for corrective action. Since January 2021, the Office of Audits has issued 13 audit and evaluation reports that made 83 recommendations to SEC management, all of which were agreed to by management and more than half of which are closed as of this date. Among other things, our recommendations have sought to aid the Division of Enforcement in improving communication of its capabilities and resources that may expedite investigations, help further increase efficiencies in the SEC's whistleblower program, improve strategic planning and performance management related to the SEC's investor education and outreach, and further strengthen the SEC's contract management, information security, investment advisor, investment company examination program, tips, complaints, and referrals program, and controls over hiring actions. The Reports Consolidation Act of 2000 requires OIGs to identify and report annually on the most serious management and performance challenges facing agencies. In deciding whether to identify an area as a challenge, the SEC OIG considers its significance in relation to the SEC's mission, its susceptibility to fraud, waste, and abuse, and the SEC's progress in addressing the challenge. We provide a draft of each year's report to SEC officials, and we consider all comments received when finalizing the report. Last October, we issued our latest report on management and performance challenges, and we identified 4 broad areas where the SEC faces challenges. The first area is meeting regulatory oversight responsibilities. In this section, our report described the challenges of managing resources while meeting the SEC's regulatory agenda, keeping pace with changing markets and innovations, and leveraging technology and analytics to meet mission requirements and respond to significant developments and trends. In part, we discussed opportunities to further strengthen cross-functional collaboration and communication during a period of increased rulemaking activities and in light of changes in the workforce, including due to attrition. The second area, protecting SEC systems and data, noted opportunities to evaluate and address the underlying causes and impact of a material weakness related to insufficient user controls, strengthen the agency's cybersecurity posture, and continue to mature its information security program. Improving contract management is the next challenge noted in our report. As we described, a growing majority of the SEC's contract support by dollars obligated is concentrated in information technology services, and management of information technology acquisitions and operations is recognized as a high-risk area across the executive branch. Additionally, as in prior years, we reported on the SEC's use of time and material contracts, noting that such contracts are considered riskier than fixed-price contracts because contractors bill the government by the hour and therefore may lack incentives for cost control. The final challenge discussed in our report is ensuring human capital management. In this section, we provide data that demonstrates recent increases in attrition. We also discussed uncertainties that exist surrounding the plans for return to office and the potential for expanded telework, as well as an audit we completed that identified opportunities to further strengthen controls over the SEC's hiring actions. In conclusion, the SEC OIG remains committed to examining important aspects of the SEC's programs and operations. For example, we're currently assessing controls over public comments submitted online and agency actions taken in response to a technological error in the public comment process that was disclosed last year. We look forward to continuing our cooperative working relationship with SEC management and this subcommittee. Thank you for the subcommittee's support for our mission and for the opportunity to testify. I would be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, and sorry, we're having a little bit of a clock issue, but I think we are doing okay, and have that taken care of at this point. So, with that, we're going to now turn to member questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for questioning. I will note my colleague was going on in his comments about this focusing only on the Biden administration. Well, we're 2 years in, halfway through the Biden administration. So yes, I will note that Jay Clayton, as head of the SEC, had an active schedule in front of this subcommittee, or in front of this committee, under the Hill, both under Republicans and Democrats as well, while he served until 2020. So I want to thank our witnesses again, and I'm going to jump right into my questions. Ms. Sherrick, my first question is for you. I'm concerned about transparency at the SEC. The SEC is one of the wealthiest independent agencies in our federal government based on how it collects the fines and uses that to fund itself. The agency has many employees and resources, yet it appears not to allocate them to respond to congressional inquiries or FOIA requests made under Freedom of Information Act, ensure that citizens and the media and others can provide a check on the government and hold the federal government accountable to its statutory duties. I understand that you worked on the Top Management Challenges Report of 2022. Considering the major workforce challenges that were highlighted in that report, attrition and some other things, do you plan to evaluate resource allocation with respect to the different offices at the agency, specifically the General Counsel's office who responds to Congress and the Office of FOIA Services?
So yes, I did work on the Management Performance Challenge Report in question. We're beginning the work to produce this year's report, and we will certainly be following up on some of the workforce challenges that we identified. We have not planned an audit specifically of the allocations of the different offices and divisions, but as we develop our FY24 plan, we're certainly interested in continuing to discuss with you your concerns.
Consider this a suggestion. Yes. I think we've seen a tremendous delay in responses to frankly, members on both sides of the aisle, as well as the media and others when it comes to FOIA. So as you know, the committee initiated an investigation into FTX under the leadership of, at the time, Chair Waters. That has been continued with Chair McHenry. We also formally requested an investigation from your office. Will your office commit to investigating the SEC's role and involvement with FTX?
I'm aware of the letter in question and have participated in some preliminary conversations amongst our leadership team. I've not been involved in all of those discussions. in my role as the head of the Office of Audit. I think any questions about what our office may or may not do would probably be best addressed to our acting Inspector General.
At a different time?
Well, I'm sure our office can reach out to you and your staff and provide. I'm not prepared in my role as the head of the Office of Audit to speak for our acting Inspector General.
Okay. Next question is for you, Mr. Delmar. Standing up the Emergency Rental Assistance Program was particularly challenging, no doubt. Complaints about those programs are not new and continue to come through as ERA 2 funds continue through 2027. Mr. Delmar, is it true that your office has received thousands of pandemic-related complaints through your hotline, with most of them related to the ERA?
Yes, sir. We have on the order of over 2,000 at this point. It grows by the day, and that's why we've set up the cross-functional team to specifically work on processing those.
All right. And why is that? Why do you speculate? What are you hearing from folks as they're registering these complaints?
I think it's probably fair to say that it's more of a retail distribution operation. There's just more opportunities for people to see either real or perceived inequities, or people getting the funds that, for whatever reason, shouldn't. Right. And what we have to do is isolate those things, and if it's something that we can look at, we will. If it's something that somebody else ought to be looking at, we will do our best to refer it where it should go.
Mr. Balick, I've got just a few moments here left. You oversee a very busy CFPB. In the board's OIG work plan, there is a plan to, quote, review the board's approach to climate risk supervision at financial institutions within the first quarter of 2023. My concern is that the Fed may be acting outside of the supervisory role when it comes to climate policies. Can you tell me more about the goal of this review, as well as the status of the review, and what board activity has encouraged your office to add this to your, what board activity has encouraged your office to add this to your work plan? And I'm going to let you answer very quickly, and then I'm going to have a couple of other questions written to you as well.
Certainly. So we do have a team looking at climate risk issues in the supervision arena. They are going to be drafting a white paper that will be setting forth the activities of the board as it looks at establishing and implementing a climate risk activity and initiative. We're going to compare that to other agencies and departments and central banks to see and check their missions and their authorities to see how that compares to the board's efforts, maybe have some best practices laid out, so we can put the pieces of the puzzle together as the board continues to pursue this matter. We are going to give
my time has expired, so we're going to have to continue this, and maybe one of my colleagues can pick that up. Okay. So I appreciate that. At the request of the ranking member and of the subcommittee and the full committee, we are going to go to the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford, for the first question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member for holding this necessary hearing. And thank you to our Inspector Generals who are here today for appearing before the subcommittee. There can be no doubt that it is necessary at times to take a step back and retrospectively analyze the efficacy of our work, both here in Congress as well as the administration's implementation of the laws that we passed. I want to say that I'm proud of the votes that I took to deliver for the American people during the hardest days of the pandemic. And I don't need to remind my colleagues the depth of the pain that our constituents, all of our constituents, felt at times. However, despite the challenging circumstances we found ourselves in, we were able to deliver relief to families and to small businesses who were struggling to simply keep their heads above water. We were able to ensure 6.5 million working families could keep a roof over their head with the emergency rental assistance that we provided for. We were able to protect the payrolls of small businesses across the country with the Paycheck Protection Program so that they could keep their doors open and keep approximately 90 million people on the payroll. When state and local governments faced historic shortfalls, we were able to make them whole and to preserve the services that our constituents rely on every day. That includes public safety, healthcare workers, first responders, police and fire, all that are essential to our quality of life. So I'm happy to take a look back at the challenges that we faced, as long as we, as you said, Mr. Chairman, keep in mind that there were successes. So I hope that we don't forget that. These programs were vital lifelines to Americans at a time when uncertainty and fear dominated their lives. And I want to commend my colleagues for following up on our efforts from the last Congress and taking time today to ensure that these programs are working as Congress intended. Of course, there are lessons to be learned, and I'm eager to be educated on how we can better prepare for whatever may come next. Now, I've been sounding the alarm for years on the fraudsters and the thieves that have been ripping off American taxpayers and blocking honest applicants from accessing the support they need. When we saw issues with the unemployment insurance system, I introduced the GUARD Act to guarantee our state unemployment insurance programs can fight back against these literal criminal cartels, most of whom are foreign. No individual should be allowed to take advantage of individuals desperately in need of these emergency benefits. It should be no different in the programs overseen by our witnesses today. These criminals should and will be held accountable. But in order to do so, we must have accurate data on the funds that were dispersed. So, Mr. Delmar, I understand that multiple programs under Treasury's jurisdiction, including the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, have had various reporting and compliance delays that have impeded monitoring and audit activities. Would you please speak to how these delays may inhibit the department's ability to identify and eliminate fraud?
Generally speaking, Congressman, a lot of the problem was delays by the department in setting up how the programs were actually going to be operated and putting together the guidance so that people who were applying had a clear idea of what was eligible and what was not. The combination of delays in standing up the program, having the guidance, and being able to get the reports input just means that you have less of a thorough view of what's going on. And anytime there's a lack of guidance, the opportunities for ineligibles to get benefited increases.
Okay. I'm going to follow up with this last question. I'd like to ask you to respond in writing, but I'm concerned about the implementation of the community development financial institutions and the minority depository institutions and the funds that we need to ensure are getting to the marginalized and underserved communities. So if you would please respond in writing to the question that I will submit for the record. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, we are going to go to the gentlewoman from Missouri, the former chair of this subcommittee and ranking member as well, Ms. Wagner, and who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets. She is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Chairman Huizinga. Ms. Sharek, the SEC Inspector General's report on the SEC's management and performance challenges from last October. I know you were the first IG and you worked on this particular report. I think it was released under a second IG, but I know that this was you were working on it as you were the first one appointed as acting. So it highlights the concerns of many managers across the SEC about increased risks specifically and difficulties managing mission-related work. The report is very clear that these concerns are driven by the, quote, increase in the SEC's rulemaking activities that are being rushed with shortened timelines during the drafting process. These are directly from the report, and shortened public comment periods. The Inspector General is not only the only one urging the SEC to slow down. Last April, several members of this subcommittee joined a group of 47 bipartisan members in a letter to Chair Gensler asking for longer comment periods, particularly for significant rulemakings. And in September, 12 Democratic senators sent a similar letter. Yet, since the IG report was released, the SEC has not, underscore not, reduced its quantity or slowed down its speed of rulemaking. By the end of 2022, the SEC had introduced 34 new rule proposals, an increase of 143% compared to the annual average over the preceding 5 years of 14. The October released report made it clear that the volume and pace of rulemaking under Chair Gensler are threatening what the Inspector General exists to promote. And I quote, this is what what you worked on and helped draft put out here. Quote, the integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness of the critical programs and operations of the SEC. Ms. Sherrick, with such short comment periods, are managers concerned that the commission is not getting the data they need from all stakeholders?
Some of the folks that we met with in some of the rulemaking divisions did express that there may be some increased risk there, and we felt, given the role that individuals that we met with and their experience, that it warranted inclusion in the major management and performance challenges.
Increased risk, I agree. What other tools does the Inspector General have to address the management problems stemming from the SEC's regulatory agenda?
So certainly, as you know, we will revisit these issues, and we're starting to work on and gather our staff together. This month was typically when we'll begin efforts to draft this year's report. So we will be following up on each of the issues that we addressed. Certainly, we have audits and evaluations that my office performs, and then investigations from the Office of Investigations as well.
Could you please provide additional detail on these risks that are being created by the mission-related work that's being neglected because of the increase in rulemaking activities, as well as the causes and impacts of the, quote, coordination and communication challenges in the rulemaking process, particularly given potential overlaps in jurisdiction and differences in opinions?
I don't have any specific risks to any specific activity that I can offer to you. The conversations that we had with knowledgeable individuals were broad. They broadly described, as you mentioned, the volume and the urgency. So nothing, I don't have anything more specific.
It did say, though, that mission-related work was being neglected. Is that correct?
I don't know that we use the word neglect.
Yes, you said mission-related work that was causing risks.
So generally, as I said, we did not have any specific details that were provided to us.
Do you anticipate that the IG will be following up on these issues, given that they impact the Commission's ability to meet its mission, including protecting investors?
That the IG's office will follow up? Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Chair, before yielding back, I'd like to have it submitted to the record the fact that Secretary Gensler has not appointed a permanent IG after over 2 years in the job. I'd like to say in the record, and that what he is doing is every 180 days putting in a new acting. I think this is a way to thwart Congress and our oversight, and so we can't actually talk to an IG who's permanent. I'd like that placed in the record. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. That has been noted, and the letter requesting that the Chair Gensler appoint a permanent IG has been sent as well. With that, the chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I have been trying to quickly understand the role and responsibility of all of the Inspector Generals relative to the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. I want to know if you were involved at all with the Defense Production Act, any of you, in planning or in management concerns? Do you know anything about the Defense Production Act? Please, each of you, please. Yes or no?
No, ma'am.
No?
No.
No?
No, ma'am.
No.
No.
Do you, how were you involved with the PPP program? Any of you know anything about the PPP program?
It is not within Treasury OIG's oversight jurisdiction.
But you had the responsibility for basically planning, as I understand it. What were you planning? I'm reading your description of what you had the responsibility for.
Our oversight responsibility is for the original Coronavirus Relief Fund, the Emergency Rental Assistance Programs, the air carrier programs, the state and local fiscal recovery fund, the CDFI Rapid Response Program, the Emergency Capital Improvement, the CERTS program, which deals with other transportation entities, and an extension of the old SSBCI program.
So you are not familiar with PPP and all of what happened in the first year of the PP program under Trump, when the big companies and corporations were in the panels created by the banks as their concierge clients. They got funded, and some of them even felt guilty and gave the money back. Are you familiar with that?
I'd like to add to what I said previously. Our involvement on the PPP program, we have helped, along with many other IGs, the SBA IG and the PRAC in conducting investigations into abuses in the PPP program.
Okay, was this the first year of the PPP program
That we got involved?
that you got involved, that you were involved in helping the SBA?
I don't recall exactly when we and other IGs were recruited to help the SBA OIG, but pretty early on, yes, ma'am.
Okay, were you responsible for helping to identify these major corporations who got PPP money that were not in, that PPP program was not intended to give money to? Are you familiar with that?
I'm certainly familiar with it, but we don't have primary responsibility for that. We've been, as I said, with other IGs, helping the SBA OIG, which has a tremendous
And so, do you know who
responsibility.
was responsible, who is responsible for looking at fraud, waste, and abuse in PPP?
The SBA OIG and the PRAC is involved in that as
So
well.
you worked with SBA OIG, but had nothing to do with PPP?
Each IG is independent, ma'am, and we help each other, as I said.
Well, when you help each other, you talk to each other?
Yes, we do.
And so, did you all talk about PPP and what was going on?
Sure. In the PRAC and in the Council of IGs on Integrity and Efficiency, it's a big issue. And it was one of the ones that was so big that more than just Mr. Ware's shop at SBA OIG got involved in it. It was to help him carry out his responsibilities as the person responsible for oversight of the SBA.
And so, while we're looking at fraud, waste, and abuse, and the way that you have described what your responsibility was, can you say that in an investigation, part of your responsibility was to discover or find or investigate fraud, waste, and abuse in anything that you were doing?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't hear the end of that. Could you restate it again?
Did you have the responsibility for investigating fraud, waste, and abuse in any of your responsibilities?
Yes, under the IG Act, each IG is responsible for looking at fraud and waste in the programs and operations of that department, which in the case of my office would be Treasury programs, except not the IRS and not the TARP program.
Did you find?
The gentlelady's time has expired. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you very much. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. With that, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose, who is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huizenga and Ranking Member Green, for holding this hearing, and thanks to our witnesses for taking time to be here today and for your insights. I want to start with Deputy IG Sherrick. Your report shows that Mr. Gensler's aggressive rulemaking agenda has been limiting the time available for staff research and analysis, which could potentially make cost-benefit analysis exponentially more difficult and less accurate. Almost every one of his 60-plus rulemakings, including on private funds, dealer definitions, Form PF, equity market structure, climate disclosures, and now the custody proposal, has significant consequences for the numerous industries targeted by these rules. So, Deputy IG Sherrick, is it true that the report found that each of the major rulemaking divisions at the Commission has stated that they do not have enough time to properly write all of these rules?
No, I cannot support that statement. We certainly collected information that there is a challenge, an ongoing challenge, again, related to the folks that we met with who shared that in certain cases, the volume and the urgency of the rulemaking activity is presenting a challenge. We do not have evidence to show at this date that any one of the rulemaking activities, we didn't speak to them about specific rules or the substance of specific rules. It was more geared towards the workload and the challenge that was presenting to the managers that we met with.
Isn't it true, though, that they had to pull one rule back and reopen for comment period because there was a failure to properly catalog all the comments that had been submitted?
I'm not sure which rule you're referring to. They reopened the comment period for a number of rules that related to a technological error that was publicly disclosed. So I'm aware of that. I'm not sure if that's the rule that you're referring to.
Would you surmise that that technological error, the failure to observe that, might have been a result of the rushed or frantic pace of rulemaking?
My office is looking into the technological error, and we plan to hopefully be able to provide a public report on that by the end of this month. So I don't want to get out ahead of the work that was still ongoing, but I think we'll have an answer to that question as soon as our work concludes.
Well, we look forward to hearing that answer. Secondly, Deputy IG Sherrick, is it true that the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis has warned that they do not have enough time to conduct proper cost-benefit analysis for all of these rules?
I'm not aware of that specific warning.
Has the agency shown any attempt or awareness with regard to perhaps slowing down or reassessing the process based on the IG's recommendations? In other words, do they seem to be listening to the report that you've put forward?
Well, as has already been stated in this hearing by the numbers, the numbers continue to increase throughout the remainder of last year. We will certainly continue engaging with the agency to determine what they may have done with respect to our management performance challenge. Unlike an audit report where we have an actionable recommendation that we ask them to respond to and then we assess their performance, this report was informational to them to take for the action deemed necessary. So again, we'll be continuing to follow up to see exactly what they may have done.
Sounds sort of like a damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead policy there. IG Bielik, I asked earlier this morning Chairman Powell about the Fed's oversight of the CFPB's budget request, and he told me that you would have the answer. So I hope that you have the answer, or I guess I will have to go back to him. So the question, IG Bielik, is, does the Federal Reserve Board perform any due diligence of the CFPB's claims about its budget, or any verification of the budget requests and whether they comply with statute?
Well, Congressman, we conducted a review actually based on a request from Congressman Barr back in 2019, I believe it was. We issued a report in 2019 where we looked at exactly what the legal responsibilities were of the board and the Bureau when it comes to processing requests from the Bureau, CFPB, for their quarterly budget. We looked at both the CFPB's responsibilities to provide information to the board. We looked at the board's responsibilities under the law for what it is they were required to do in processing those requests. We determined that they both abided by those statutory requirements that were in Dodd-Frank for that purpose. We did find there was some failure to report to Congress some information about those budget requests. I think for 2 or 3 years they fixed that and started reporting them as they were required to do. But other than that, they both were upholding their legal responsibilities under the statute.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, who is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses who are joining us today. Before I get to my questions, I would like to just point out as a point of personal privilege that this title is just really a misnomer and a misrepresentation of the essential and sensible pandemic and economic relief dollars that the Biden administration has provided to the American public. Wasteful spending, you know, it really was about saving lives, and that's what we should really be looking at. In Texas alone, $3.3 billion helped nearly 736,000 households pay their rent, and PPP funding helped over 209,000 businesses in Houston alone, while a deadly pandemic ravaged our nation. With that context, I also want to remind everyone that all these programs were passed and signed somewhere between April and May of 2020, and our president was not inaugurated till January 20th, 2021. So in fact, most of these programs were signed into law by the former twice impeached president, and more importantly, they were implemented by him. I remember on more than one occasion when we had Secretary Mnuchin talking about the PPP program. We had Secretary Carson talking about the housing assistance. So this whole misnomer, misinformation that it's all President Biden and all his fault, frankly, is just what we would call in Texas, well, I really shouldn't say that word, I'll just say bunk. It's just bunk. So Mr. Del Mar, I'm going to start with you. I'm just trying, frankly, sir, to get my head around what is it you really do. You first said, in response to one of my colleagues' questions, that you really didn't have any authority or did anything with the PPP program. But then when the ranking member of our committee asked you a question, you said, well, yes, we do, because we went in there and helped. So did you or didn't you not work on anything having to do with the PPP program? And do you agree with me that when you say that there was a problem with setting it up, it wasn't President Biden who set it up, that was set up back when it first got passed in the year before?
Let me clarify, Congresswoman.
Please do.
Okay. We do not have primary oversight.
No, I understand the word primary, sir, but you later said that you did because you went in there to help the SBA OIG. So did you or did you not review, audit any of the PPP loans?
No, we were assisting more on the investigative side of individual cases involving instances of PPP fraud.
So you did look at cases involving PPP fraud. Do you recall if those cases were before or after January 20th, 2021?
I don't recall when our assistance started.
No, I mean, when were the cases were involving loans between January 2021, before or after?
I can get you an answer for that, ma'am. I don't want to give you incomplete or erroneous information now, so I will have to check our records.
All right, so you're not familiar with any weight, fraud, or abuse of any of the PPP loans at all?
Not in specific detail of specific cases. I mean, I can tell you generally.
No, I don't want specifics. I just want to know whether you did or you didn't do any of it, because you're here testifying, and I'm trying to figure out who's supposed to talk about these things.
Okay. Well,
But that's all right, sir. I'll move on to Ms. Sherrick. Ms. Sherrick, 2 management challenges identified in the SEC OIG October 22nd memo are mentioned as being managing resources while meeting the regulatory agenda and implementing a program to effectively retain and recruit qualified staff to replace personnel loss due to attrition. Is it the case that the SEC OIG reviews and audits have established that there's a causal relationship between these two?
No.
There is not. Or does this report state that SEC faces 2 separate problems, an increased regulatory workload and an increase in the loss of personnel that combine increase the management and performance challenges confronting the SEC?
It's true, we did not establish a causal relationship between those. We didn't attempt to, and we did not. Our view, as expressed in our report, is that there were 2 things occurring at the same time. There may be a relationship. We didn't look at that. We will review that in FY23 or in our FY23 work, but we did not establish the causal relationship.
So you did not. You do just see it as 2 separate problems?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, who is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to our witnesses. Mr. Delmar, I'd like to address some troubling information regarding Financial Crime Enforcement Network, FinCEN. FinCEN is the primary regulator of the Bank Secrecy Act and is charged with maintaining government-wide data. In your written testimony, based on audits from your office, highlight significant concerns with 4 aspects of FinCEN: suppression, user access, MOUs, and monitoring. Regarding suppression processes, are the processes being used by FinCEN sufficient to protect data?
Not completely, sir. It's with many other situations, there isn't the regime of internal controls and follow-up that would be ideal. And that's, as I said, one of our reports, which will be issued later this year, will address the specifics of that.
Yes, sir. And then I would request, we don't have enough time to go into the details, but any recommendations that you or our other witnesses might have to improve suppression processes, if you could submit those to the committee, I think that would be ideal. Mr. Chairman, I do believe you had a couple of additional questions, so I yield to you the balance of my time, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And Mr. Balick, at the very end of my questioning, you were starting to say something. We were kind of on a roll about the Fed's pilot climate analysis program. Does your office intend to review the nature of this?
What we are doing is we are reviewing the board's process as it exists today to develop and eventually, presumably, implement some activity regarding climate risk. We will be laying out in our white paper what those activities, what that progress has been, how they've gone about doing it. And I think I was mentioning that we are going to be doing some benchmarking with other departments and agencies and central banks and comparing what others have done in the space to what the board has done and make any kind of key considerations available to the board as they continue to pursue this. I don't want to prejudge or predetermine the outcome of that white paper because it is in process right now. But that's the game plan, and I will say we decided to do this white paper because obviously this is a hot-button, controversial topic. And we thought we were uniquely positioned to be able to kind of lay out the status of it, put the pieces of the puzzle together to explain to the public, it will be a public report, what has been going on and what the game plan is. and then also position ourselves to possibly do some further work, audit or evaluation work in this space, depending on how that program evolves.
Okay. Very quickly in this remaining time, because I need to get to Ms. Sherrick as well. You're aware of the ongoing current case pending before the Supreme Court regarding the funding mechanisms for the CFPB. I noticed in your most recent inspector report on management challenges that they're even looking into the potential impact on the court's decision as to the constitutionality, and they aren't even subject to the lawsuit, the Fed. Is your office looking into this as well? And if so, what steps have you gone to take the process of review?
Because the matter is going to be presented and will be pending before the Supreme Court, we have not gone ahead and done any assessment of the potential impact of a decision from the Supreme Court on the Bureau's, the CFPB's funding, because it depends a lot on the rationale, obviously which way they decide, but also on the rationale for any decision. Once we have that, we'll be in a better position to make that assessment.
All right, might want to start thinking about it. All right, Ms. Sherrick, last week we learned that SEC employees will officially return to the office at the end of the month. According to reports, they'll be required to be in the office 2 days per pay period. That's twice a month is the pay period, so basically an average of 1 day a week. We also know that the SEC plans to move into a new 1.2 million square foot headquarters in Washington, D.C., which can accommodate 4,500 employees at one time. Given these new developments, will your office be reviewing the SEC's lease agreement as part of your audit plan?
We will certainly take that into consideration. We did not have that on our plan, but I take your point.
It would seem having a background in real estate and construction, that is very valuable real estate in downtown DC, and there's going to be a pretty penny paid. And if we aren't even filling that with the employees, that's a problem. So gentleman's time is expired, and so he yields back. The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Williams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses who are here with us today. The programs that the institutions represented here today oversee, audit, and investigate supported Americans in every congressional district, including people of color, working families, and many minority business owners during the pandemic. Congressional Democrats, putting people over politics, created these life-saving programs that were critical to uplifting communities and supporting the most marginalized. As we continue to move towards a strong recovery, we need to keep a watchful eye on these programs to make sure that they're supporting the people that they were intended to support. The resources that these programs offered put children back in school, kept businesses open, kept people employed, and kept families in their homes. We've all seen the data that shows how communities of color were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, leading to a greater need for resources. My hometown of Atlanta unfortunately felt this more severely than any other city in America as we lead the nation in the racial wealth gap. Under Democratic leadership, this committee strongly supported CDFIs and MDIs, recognizing the importance of diverse and mission-driven community financial institutions for marginalized communities. In recent years, the number of CDFIs in Atlanta and across Georgia have multiplied rapidly, offering a lifeline for many business owners, homeowners, and others seeking capital in our communities. But we've heard concerns that some firms were receiving certifications, but were not truly focused on providing financial access to underserved communities. In response, the CDFI Fund took steps to overhaul its certification process. We can't allow firms to receive assistance meant for true CDFIs if they're not going to do the work. Mr. Delmar, your office has overseen these efforts. What are your office's plans to examine CDFI and MDI programs that are intended to strengthen these institutions and ensure funds are going to underserved communities, including communities of color, that traditional financial institutions often ignore?
We have a number of audits that have either been accomplished or are underway. We have specific responsibility for looking at CDFI's rapid response program, and we are certainly open to additional targeted work. I can send you, after this hearing, a fuller description of the work that we've done and are doing, and you're one of our stakeholders. If you have particular concerns that you think warrant our review, we want to take that into account and to the extent that we've got the bandwidth to do it, we can.
Thank you, Mr. Delmar. Also, your office oversees the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which Congress renewed and expanded in the American Jobs Recovery Act in 2020. This committee sought to ensure that the sole proprietors and other small businesses had access to the technical assistance they needed to apply for SSBCI and other forms of loans and investments, allowing them to use that financing to grow their businesses. Georgia uses SSBCI funds to support 5 crucial programs for startups and other small businesses, but I'm concerned that this capital is not reaching the business owners that need it most. Mr. Delmar, how does your office plan to examine Treasury and the jurisdictions receiving funds to guarantee that SSBCI is administered consistent with congressional intent to ensure that the smallest and most underserved small businesses get the support and financing they need? And can you provide any insight on how states have worked to ensure that SSBCI financing reaches marginalized communities?
As a baseline, certainly our oversight of any of these programs is to make sure that they're actually executing what Congress's intent was in the organic legislation. Again, as I said in response to your last question, if you'll give me the opportunity to pull together some information on what we've done and what we expect to be doing, and again, any input that you or any other member of the committee has on, specific concerns, we will take that into account.
Thank you. I will look forward to that follow-up. Also, during the pandemic, the Fed stood up the Main Street Lending Program to provide support for mid-sized companies that may not have qualified for PPP loans. Even so, there is still demand for small businesses to get medium to longer-term financing once their PPP funds ran dry. As you may recall, Chairwoman Waters and others repeatedly asked the Fed to modify the qualifications to remove unnecessary barriers to access for small businesses. Mr. Bialik, what has your office found when looking at how much a similar program could be better designed to ensure smaller businesses have access to financing in future emergencies? And you might have to send me this in writing since I am out of time.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to our witnesses for being here. Ms. Sherrick, as the Deputy Inspector General at the SEC, would the SEC enforce ESG mandates which require investment banks or banks to renege on their fiduciary responsibility to their investors?
That's not an issue that my office has reviewed, so unfortunately, I cannot answer that question.
Okay, can we follow up on it? Thank you.
Yes.
Also, Ms. Sherrick, in the February 15th report from the Office of Audits about the timeliness of enforcement actions, the report found that timeliness had improved from 2016 to 2021. It is a little concerning related to SPACs because I'm hearing from many retail investors and the special purpose acquisition companies that they're very concerned with the length of time that their investments are being held in limbo because of prolonged SEC enforcement actions. It's being reported to me that the SEC either barely communicates or does not communicate at all about the status of this enforcement. Has your office conducted any audits related to the SEC's treatment of SPACs?
No, we have not.
Okay. Is that something we can provide you information on, and perhaps you could?
Yes, we'd be happy to discuss your concerns with you.
All right, great. And it does, information, again, I'm receiving that the approval process, the SEC have taken quite a bit longer than the average case, and in many cases, the SEC deals with many high-profile deals, which we hear about, including those that may have a political partisanness to them and are somewhat subjective and or controversial. Are you aware of any unusually lengthy applications under the review and communications that are currently pending before the SEC?
No, I don't have information on those issues.
I see. Okay. Well, there's data from industry groups specializing in the S4 filing process. They've reported that the average time for the SEC to process this form was 82 days in 2020 and up to 134 days last year. Yet I have reports that there's one particular case that the SEC has not made a determination for over 500 days with no explanation. Can you try to explain that?
Again, these are not issues that my office has reviewed, but we would be happy to get back with you on any information that we may have. In the other components of our office, it's just not something that I'm prepared to speak on today. My office hasn't looked at those issues.
All right, so we can submit to your office the specific case and ask for you to conduct an oversight and a response?
Again, yes, I just don't, that's not something that my office has looked at, so I don't have any information. We're happy to continue discussing with you and your staff what your concerns are, and if there's a way that we can produce some meaningful work in that area, we will take that under consideration.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to yield to my colleague, Mr. Ogles, the remaining minute and a half that I have.
Mr. Delmar, in 2018, the BPI conducted a comprehensive study to help determine if the resources bank put towards anti-money laundering compliance were providing law enforcement with useful data. BPI found that participating banks spent roughly $2.4 billion and employed roughly 14,000 individuals for AML regulatory compliance. Despite those high costs, BPI found that only 4% of suspicious activity reports and 0.44% of currency transactions warranted law enforcement follow-up. FinCEN has about 470 memorandum of understanding with law enforcement and intelligence components. Once an agency has been approved, what are the issues that you see with MOUs and continued compliance, and of course the financial burdens therein?
The issues we see specifically with the MOUs is that many of them are very, very old. They need to be updated. It needs to be clear what the actual rights and responsibilities of the participants in the MOUs are. I mean, overall, sir, the problem is that FinCEN doesn't have as much control over what gets done with the BSA information once it's distributed, what further uses it gets put to, and those are the nature of the findings that we've put together, that we've shared with FinCEN management, and that will be coming out in the reports later this year.
Thank you, Mr. Delmar. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this time, the gentleman from Texas, the ranking member, Mr. Green, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for appearing today. And I'd like to, if I may, take a moment to talk just a bit about what occurred with the pandemic. In 2022, we surpassed 1 million deaths to the pandemic. I traversed the streets in Houston, Texas. No cars, or very few cars, very few vehicles on the street. Businesses were closed. Not all, a good many. People were concerned about paying the rent. They were concerned about paying their mortgages. People were afraid. It was a pandemic, a global shutdown. My assumption is that you're not here today to tell us that we shouldn't have provided money directed to people to assist with rent and mortgages and food on the table and keeping their homes and avoiding eviction. You're not here to tell us that we shouldn't have done that, are you? If you are here to tell us this, raise your hand. Let the record reflect that no hands are up. You're not here to tell us that we shouldn't have spent some $792.6 billion to to support small businesses, are you? If so, raise your hand. Let the record reflect that no one has raised a hand. And surely you're not here to tell us that we should have spent the $29.6 billion in emergency rental assistance, assisting 6.5 million households, keeping people in their homes, roof over their heads. You're not here to tell us that we shouldn't have done that, are you? My suspicion is that the pandemic was something that we had to fight by spending money. I say my suspicion. It's a fact we did. We spent $47.8 billion testing, performing contact tracing, and mitigation. You're not here to tell us that that was a bad idea, are you? If so, raise your hand. Let the record reflect that no one has raised a hand. Here's my point. I'm not going to allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. There were many good things done, many good things. And many of us have been criticized as Democrats for doing these good things to protect the American people when we had a global pandemic. How on earth could we have had the people of this country believe that their government was doing what it was supposed to do without our providing assistance? People expect the government to step in and be of assistance when they can't work because we told them not to go to work, when they couldn't pay the mortgage payments because we required that they stay home. This is what people expect from the government, that we would do these things. So I am exceedingly proud of the way my Democratic colleagues and I were adults in the room and decided that we would do what was right for the American people. Yes, there were some mistakes made along the way. But if you're going to talk about mistakes made along the way and you're going to develop best practices, you ought to look at the entirety of the picture and all of the mistakes if you're going to have best practices. And that's what we should look for here in Congress. So I thank you for appearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For that, the chair recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Mooney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Bialik, your office has no small task. You oversee two independent agencies, the Federal Reserve and the CFPB. Typically, I understand your time is split 60-40 in favor of the Federal Reserve, but most recently maybe more like 70-30 following the pandemic lending programs that were mentioned. The CFPB, however, has a unique and frankly, I believe unconstitutional funding structure, taking funds from the Federal Reserve rather than through the annual appropriations process from Congress. This insulates the CFPB from really congressional oversight. In fiscal year 2022, the CFPB requested $642 million from the Federal Reserve for operating expenses, a record high, yet the CFPB's unobligated funds or leftover funds have only increased over the past several years, more than doubling from 2018, now at $128 million. In fact, the only time the CFPB spent down any of its unobligated funds was under Acting Director Mick Mulvaney, who wisely decided to use those funds instead of requesting more when it was not needed. So, Mr. Bialik, can you explain why the CFPB keeps requesting record transfers from the Federal Reserve while the amount of leftover funds continues to grow?
We haven't done a deep dive into, for example, financial statement analysis of how they handle their funds. If there are certainly some concerns about them having violated any statutory provision or a regulation, that's something we would be interested in hearing about, and we would follow up on.
Okay, well, thank you. I would encourage you to look into that, not let this turn into some kind of a slush fund or a witch hunt organization under Director Chopra. And let's frankly hope the Supreme Court does the right thing by concluding their funding structure is unconstitutional. We can bring real accountability through Congress to that bureau as well. But Mr. Bialik, 20 agencies with similar or smaller operating budgets than the CFPB have a dedicated inspector general for each agency, not shared with other agencies. So how would you, I'd like some insurance. How are you ensuring that the CFPB has proper oversight?
We take a look at our management challenges that we have identified for the CFPB, and we look at kind of a risk analysis of the programs and operations of the CFPB. We look at financial risk, we look at reputational risk, operational risk, and mesh that with the management challenges that we've already determined are those areas for which if they don't satisfactorily address them, they are in jeopardy of not being able to carry out successfully their mission. We will be adding more work to our CFPB work plan in terms of audits and evaluations now that we see the pandemic work lessening. And I fully suspect that ratio between the work we do at the board and the Bureau will come closer to the same percentage. As always, I encourage any member of this subcommittee to get a hold of us and let us know if there are some risk areas as you see them that we should take into consideration as we do our work plan for the coming year. We would welcome those conversations.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that response, and you might be hearing from me on some specifics. My last question would be, let me first say the CFPB, in my opinion, has rightfully been criticized based on our first discussion about going outside the rulemaking, outside their authority. They've rightfully been criticized for regulating through press releases, blog posts, and changes to its examination manual, the latter clearly violating the CFPB's statutory authority and notice and comment requirements for rulemaking. So is your office reviewing how the CFPB is using every possible avenue to circumvent the traditional rulemaking process?
Congressman, the IG community is prohibited from delving into or weighing into policy disputes, policy differences of view. If we do engage in that, it throws up a roadblock in terms of our ability to be viewed as objective in going in and auditing or evaluating the programs and operations which evolve from that policy. So we have to make a distinction between what are policy-based issues, versus what are fraud, waste, abuse, illegality in terms of how an agency is conducting itself. So that would be kind of my kind of high-level answer to your question. Also some of those policy issues I think you're alluding to are matters that are in litigation, and that's another area that IGs are mindful not to wade into. We're not judges or juries in terms of interpreting the law. So with those provisos, I would say, other types of concerns you have, we'd be happy to discuss with you and pursue.
Okay, I think my time is
Well, and I will note that the clock was frozen apparently at 44 seconds and then jumped to 9 seconds. So there was a pause there, so my apologies on that. With that, I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair. We will then pass those along to you, and we request that you respond to those as promptly as possible. And with that, I appreciate the participation from all my colleagues. Certainly, we appreciate the participation of our witnesses. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.